So welcome back, everybody. We're on to stage 2 of the day, and we're very excited to have Sue Beckingham back with us, a great friend and colleague and collaborator with ATU, Associate Professor Sue Beckingham, and her colleague and co-author of this wonderful book we're going to hear about, Professor Peter Hartley. Now, Sue, as many of you know, is Principal Lecturer and Associate Professor in Learning, Teaching and Assessment and a lead in computing. In addition to teaching at both undergraduate and postgraduate level, she has an academic development leadership role where she provides guidance and support relating to all things learning, teaching and assessment. And she was awarded in 2017 with the National Teaching Fellowship. And I know more recently, congratulations, Sue, you were awarded your Principal Fellowship from Advance HE. So also we have Peter Hartley, Professor Hartley with us, and both are representing a wonderful team, Dr. Jenny Lawrence, who's not with us, but they will be representing their work also, and Stephen Powell. Professor Peter Hartley is a freelance higher education consultant. He is a visiting professor at Edge Hill University, and following various previous roles, he's been a professor of education development at Bradford, professor of communication at Sheffield Hallam, and also a National Teaching Fellow since 2000. So wonderful to have Peter with us and Sue on the call. So just a brief introduction, the keynote is looking at using generative AI effectively in higher education. And many of you have seen this publication. It's available in our own library here in ATU, and it's also available online. It's a CEDA publication. It examines the pivotal role higher education institutes play in ethically and sustainably harnessing generative artificial intelligence. And this is an edited collection featuring various contributions from across the world and here in Ireland. And I know we have one of the contributors, Hazel Farrell from SCTU, who is also a contributor in this book, and she's with us here today as well. So this book is structured around 4 key themes. You will hear about institutional strategies for building generative AI capability, developing generative AI literacies, curriculum design for a generative AI-enabled world, and assessment in a generative AI-enabled world. So handing over now to Sue and Peter. So take it away.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You've stolen a few of my starting lines there, Karina, but it's fine. Yeah, Hazel, I'm aware that she's at the conference, and you know that imposter syndrome, because she's done some phenomenal work across generative AI and as part of the NTutor project, as you well know. So yes, we're enthusiastic. We don't pretend to be experts, but we have been very, very curious and investigative to look at how we can look at using generative AI in an ethical and sustainable way. So just take a little look at this first slide here. We put in the prompt, can you provide a photorealistic colour image which shows a group of British educational developers planning their university's strategy for generative AI, and just see if you can pick out anything that's wrong with those.
We'll give you a clue that one of the illustrations is from 2024 and one from 2025. So you want to pop any comments in the chat, anything you can spot. Yes, there are indeed spelling errors. Now, how can that be with the miracle of ChatGPT? Anybody want to guess which is 2024 and which is 2025? Dodgy feet is another good spot. Anybody else? Yeah, yes. The ethnicity of the participants is fairly obvious. So Sinead, the one on the left is 2025. We put these two images in because we thought there'd be a dramatic improvement in 2025 over 2024. And in fact, I think overall the spelling on 2024 is probably better. But certainly the 2024 image, certainly the feet, the connection between the feet and the bodies is not always perfect. I think the definition of the people on 2025 is better because it's completely destroyed by the spelling mistakes. But also, again, another question for all these images, because we've used a lot of images to explore stereotypes, and we'll highlight a few more later on. Who controls the laptop on the left-hand side one? Yeah, the image is sharper, but it still can't spell. And this is the latest version of ChatGPT on the sort of $20 license. Okay, Sue, shall we proceed?
Yes, we'll get going. So we've done some introductions, but some links there to follow up on afterwards. Obviously, we'll share the slides, and the same for Peter. We've had the introductions. So there are a number of slides we'll skim past. Everything's got links in it to follow up if you want to look at. We've got some interesting videos, papers, etc. And we'll skim through some of those. So just starting with this quote, "The future belongs to all of us, and when it comes to AI, the issues at hand are too complex and integral to be left to traditional AI experts alone." And that's kind of something that struck me. You know, if it takes a village to raise a child, it's going to take a whole load of universities to work collaboratively together, educators to work together, students to work together to decide how we're best going to use generative AI in an ethical and responsible way, to the betterment of what we want to do, rather than what the tech companies are telling us that it's good for. So the structure for today, as Karina explained, is that we'll do a focus on the Cedar book, and we've got some updates from the chapter authors. New agendas, there's growing pressures to embrace this amazing generative AI, which, you know, obviously has its positives, but we've also got to consider how to consider responsible use of generative AI. And then we'll look at some trends and possible futures, and how we can support our students and what we need to support our students in, really. So there's the book and a link to the Radcliffe website. As Karina already explained, it's a collection of case studies from across the world, practitioners in various different disciplines, which is really interesting, including Hazel and music to medicine, business, and all sorts of different things, which we'll come to. So they're the four key themes of the chapters that are in sections rather in the book. And what we'll do now is just give some brief highlights of some feedback from the chapter authors 1 year on to see where they are. So I'll hand over Peter to talk through a couple from there.
Yeah, chapter 1, which we co-authored, was just a. By the way, I think we should really mention at the start here that this book came about because Jen and Stephen put an initial proposal in, and they roped us in to help with the editing. So it ended up as a community enterprise. We should pay credit to both Sue and to Jen and Stephen, really, because they kicked it off. Although we're already starting to work at it through CEDA. Okay, the chapter 1 is an overview, an introduction to the book. So we'll skip over that. This is perhaps the first substantive chapter, which is from Sam Saunders and colleagues at Liverpool University, the Centre for Innovation in Education. And I think you could see this very much as a kind of checklist of all the things that can be done within a university to push things forward. And I suppose the key elements that have come out of both the original chapter and these later developments, first of all, very much focus on strategic development, getting frameworks established, getting them established right across the university. A notion of collaboration, a notion of connections coming through, and also staff and student connections and collaborations going on there. And finally, down towards the bottom of the page there, pedagogic research, and we're very pleased to be involved in one of the projects that Sam and colleagues are doing. We'll possibly mention that later on. So very much this is what was established in the original chapter, the notion of trying to develop a really proper and comprehensive strategic framework and push it through, and this is where they are at the moment. Okay, Sue, next. And the next chapter, the other institutional chapter, is from Mary Davis, supporting inclusion in academic integrity. And again, the basic themes of this chapter are established in the book. And what she has been doing over the last year is basically trying to take it forward. And perhaps particularly interesting here are the traffic light systems, which I know several universities have now adopted, to try and give students kind of clear guidance as to what is okay, what is permissible, and what is not okay. And they've been doing that. And again, if you look at the bottom right of that screen, some of the key takeaways, the importance of building in accessibility and inclusion. And of course, Mary, as well as this chapter, has got a number of sessions online, which we urge you to have a look at. Okay.
So on to part B, and I'll hand that over to you again, Peter.
Oh, yeah. So again, three. Do you want to skip back and I'll just say a quick word about the first chapter, which is from James Bedford and colleagues. That was very much about using generative AI to help students who have English as a second language, and it's very much a case study of one particular student. And I think the important point to bring out here, which we know that James and colleagues have been taking forward since then, is the importance not just of giving the software to the student and letting them get on with it, but the importance of kind of scaffolding and support so that the student knows what might be the best way to develop their own skills. So that's the focus for chapter 4, which they have continued. Okay, Sue, next slide, please. This is from Sam Newell in Australia. The original chapter came very much from a Facebook group which they established during COVID. And one of the things that you'll find in the original book chapter is a taxonomy of different attitudes to generative AI and different feelings about how we should incorporate it. And you'll see particularly from the middle paragraph of that slide, that sort of difference is continuing. They're using very much Gen AI to provide, quote, augment marketing burnout. In other words, providing students with lots more feedback and a formative feedback. So there's a kind of contrast, I think, between that, the very positive use of Gen AI, and if you look at the bottom paragraph, you'll see still a fair bit of resistance to the idea of Gen AI, and particularly the notion that because folk value, quote, the uniquely human dynamic of teaching and learning, and a lot of the discussion that went on in their Facebook group was really about this. What are the essential characteristics of interaction that we cannot replicate through generative AI? And that's a theme that I think we'll come back to later. Okay, Sue. And the final chapter in that section from Kirsty and colleagues at Sheffield Hallam, they're really taking it forward in two ways. Increasing support for the use of Gen AI, which is the left, and again, an introduction of a traffic light system on the left there, and on the right-hand side, the idea of user experience work, which is a heavy component of the original chapter in the book, where they looked at two students in great depth who were new to Gen AI and explored how they were using it. And one student who saw it very much as a kind of just almost a replacement for a search engine didn't make much headway with it at all. And we think that that's a really important theme that needs much more exploration of how students actually define and see generative AI so that they can make best use of it. And we'll come back to that several times in this presentation. Okay, Sue.
Okay, so moving on to the next section, we've got 4 case studies here, starting with the wonderful Hazel, who introduced a case study with 18 music students. So one of the things that came out of Hazel's chapter was the idea of co-creation, so that they looked at creating their own marking rubrics together, which was really interesting, and getting the students to reflect on the use of generative AI throughout, with the recommendation that definitely further guidance on ethical use needed to be given, and ongoing guidance, because the students were obviously coming with different experiences of using generative AI. And then we've got medics from UCL, so they used images in their work. So rather than taking photographs of patients, I'm not sure whether these transitions, oh, here we come. So rather than using photographs of real patients, they were able to use at the time DALL-E to create images to replicate different medical conditions, from thyroid to size of pupils. And they've continued to do this work and explore. Sorry about these transitions. You've got so much information that you wanted to include on this slide. So then sort of looking at more detailed information and being able to zoom into that with eye situations. So definitely something that they will take forward, and saves getting the ethical approval of using real photographs. And then in terms of the role play, the original chapter was about having conversations between different types of medical students in the nursing profession, and looking at case studies of a particular patient that they would have to collaboratively work with. So this role play type of activity has continued. They've got case studies with the law school, so they've got different case types that the students can go into different rooms and check out. So that's really come a long way, which they use in Role Play Studio web app to help them with that. And then in the final section, Stephen Powell and Rachel Forsyth did a chapter around assessment. So Rachel's put together this useful graphic here to look at the possible use of generative AI, which obviously you can peruse at your own leisure, but it's a right nice summary of what can be used. And the recognition that although authentic assessment is something at the heart of everything that we're wanting to achieve, and we realise that or Rachel's stating here that we can't ban generative AI tools, and we need to focus on the process. So she's done some work in her postgraduate certificate module that she leads, or program, and looking at the reflection of the process of using generative AI is something that she advocates, but it's got to be genuine reflection, not generative AI doing the reflection for them. And then finally, David Smith and Nigel Francis have done a great deal of work in the same vein. So they're stating in their work that it's very important that rather than focusing on the output, the actual process is the thing to consider in the same way. So very interesting chapters, and obviously they're taking things forward there. So and we'll continue to do so, because nothing stands still, as you well know.
And this was our final suggestion in the final chapter, where we suggested that this can apply to institutions, it could apply to course teams, and you can also apply some of the ideas, obviously, to individual personal practice, that we need a whole range of things to be working as a coherent framework for this to further. And if you think of moving from left to right on this diagram, I mean, places have introduced regulations, they've introduced procedures. Hopefully there is sufficient professional development now for staff, students and colleagues. hopefully there's sufficient technical development because this technology is changing so fast, as we'll see in a couple of minutes. And then on the right-hand side of this diagram, this notion of student engagement plans. And one of the things we suggested in that final chapter of the book was that to make the staff side, the technical side, work effectively together with what the students are doing and how the students are developing, it would be a good idea to have what we called a collaborative sandpit. In other words, an area where people could experiment, could try things out, could check things out. And again, a wonderful area for possible co-creation. Now, we don't think that many institutions have really pushed that forward as far as they could. And perhaps you can tell us different. But that was the one recommendation that we made towards the end of the book, which we think the sector as a whole could do perhaps much more to fix that, much more to plug that gap. Okay, Sue. So one of the things that we've now, once we'd reviewed the authors and their development, and it's important to note that they are all developing, they're all taking it forward, we thought, well, actually, where have we been? And remember 2022 and the Enter Chat GPT, and there was panic. Where have we been since then? I'll hand back to Sue to say, where have we been?
Where have we been? Oh, there's been a few developments.
Just a few.
Since. I think that the panic, obviously, that we've all ensued, I think we've all experienced that and worked together. And to some degree, the panic's not necessarily gone away, because one of the things with generative AI is that it does not stand still. There seems to be every day we open a newspaper, we listen to the news on the web, on social media. There's new things coming out. So these are some of the changes and reactions to it from the Russell Group in the UK, coming up with regulations that they wanted to put out to their collection of universities, which have, other universities have obviously taken note of that as well, as other advice. And I think one of the useful things about the universities is this public sharing of policies and development and webinars and things like this, which of course you've experienced as well through your series, through the NTutor, is that we're learning about all these different things and the applications of them. But that there are also concerns in terms of the subscriptions. That we've got the carrot that leads us into these free apps, and then actually if you want the better version, the version that's going to give you the better results, the more accurate results, potentially, are the ones that you have to pay for. So the concern of the digital divide is great. And this is just a little example of just some of the apps, because of course it's multimodal now. Back in when ChatGPT came out, it was text to text, but of course swiftly followed that we could do that text to image, to audio, to video, and then we could reverse that and have an image, and then it would actually give us some text. We could create audio to text, etc. And then there's music apps, avatars, images, and language translation. Which is interesting, and more recently podcasts, and we'll touch on that at the end. And of course there's not just one tool to use, and we'll allude to that a little bit further on, but finding the right tool for the right task at a particular point in time. So this is just an example of the variety of different tools somebody could use, or a student could use, if they were undertaking some research, from refining the question to finding research papers, summarizing them, to transcribing information if you're doing primary research, proofreading, and presenting even that research. But again, these tools are changing all the time. When we first created this, there were other tools on there that have been taken over and disappeared, consumed by the bigger organizations, but something to look at with the hyperlinks there. And a survey by HEPI, the Higher Education Policy Institute, surveyed over 1,000 students, and it found that 92% of them were using AI in some form, or generative AI, as it would actually be. So we know students are using it, but are they using it effectively. And of course that differs in different areas depending on what they're being introduced to by the academics that they work with.
Okay, so one of the things that we've started thinking about since producing the book is the pressures that are now surrounding us to embrace AI and embrace Gen AI in particular. And of course, one of these things you can do with a lot of these slides is use them for an exercise, either with a staff group or a student group, to say, for example, the list of things that have changed since 2022 we gave you a couple of slides ago. You can put that in front of a group and say, well, have we missed something? What else is happening in your life that might influence how these technologies are used in education? And we'd like to flip through these pressures very quickly, because we actually were talking to a group from China the other day, mentioned this list of pressures, and the staff in that group said, yes, we are experiencing exactly the same thing. So, okay, so Sue, next slide. This notion that AI is everywhere, and it goes down not just from technical expert, but that item on the left-hand side, you may well have found that at your local news agent, a series of how to improve your life with ChatGPT, and perhaps one page out of the 95 or so says a little bit about possible problems. And of course, all those things on the right-hand side of the screen are things that you could have well used AI today. And in fact, there was a program on the radio. I woke up to a program on the radio this morning all about the impact of AI, the influence of AI. Okay, Sue. And the top user case, this is a survey from Harvard Business Review of a month or two ago. You might want to guess this, but as we're short of time, we'll move straight on to say that the top use is therapy, relationships, communication. So how did that happen? Next slide, please, Sue. And of course, we have now all the national imperatives to get involved with AI. That is the UK plan. We are about to become a superpower, according to the government announcements. We're boosting productivity, and you'll see those characteristics, the growth zones, the Energy Council, those sorts of aspirations are being portrayed all across the world, as the next slide will illustrate. Okay, Sue. There's the international competition, the race to artificial general intelligence, the machines that really can do everything. And there's the big US project is Stargate, which apparently is going to be expanded beyond the borders of USA, as you can follow that up with that article. And an example of another very large continent that is going to go do great things in future, India, and their plans, again, massive investment. And if you read that, the details on that, you find that the language is very similar to the sort of stuff that's coming out of the UK and the US government. Okay, so we also have employment as a real interesting area. I have not yet seen any major investment in AI which leads to more jobs, although that was promised by people like Sam Altman in previous over the previous year or so. And of course, one great exercise for staff and students to get involved in is finding these sorts of surveys and then translating them into your own context, your own specific, perhaps, discipline area. And that's a European study. Okay, so education, of course, we now have the notion that all our 4-year-olds and all our 5-year-olds should be starting their AI tomorrow. And that's the American plan and the presidential edict that has come out on that. And there are examples now from all sorts of other nations of this notion of it must be in junior education. Okay. And of course, the industry, the AI industry, is pushing us towards, I think, a very different, or we think rather, a very different view of this sort of software than was apparent just only a few years ago. This push towards the personal companion, which has in fact created some problems over the last few weeks. And you may have seen that OpenAI have had to revamp the issue of their latest model because the personal companion was getting rather too personal. Okay, Sue. And similarly, the AI industry have been pressurizing very much for this idea of agents. In other words, the large language model doesn't just provide you with an answer, it does things. It goes away and perhaps buys your shopping. It goes away and plans that trip, buys the tickets, etc., etc. And there's some examples on that right-hand side of some use of that actually within colleges and universities in the United States. So is that the future that we're moving towards? Okay. And the final one, this is from an article it came out a week or so ago, which effectively suggests that it's done a kind of meta-analysis of studies which suggest that ChatGPT works. And if you read the detail of that, you say it enhances student learning. What you will also find, if you look online relative to this study, is a whole host of criticisms of the method. I'm particularly suspicious of some of the ways they've compared the different studies. But is this what our opinion leaders, who are our opinion leaders? Is this what they're reading? And is this what they're taking into general policy? I'd be very interested to see. And in fact, some of the people who have been criticizing this study online may well be in the room, in which case perhaps they would like to post a comment in the chat. But I've already seen at least 5, I think, different postings on places like LinkedIn, etc., in the last 24 hours, effectively presenting the arguments, the conclusions that it favors ChatGPT without a hint of criticism or analysis. Okay, Sue. And of course, the notion of, it's not just about laptops and tablets and what have you, the notion that this will all be on your mobile, and that's Project Astro, which is the Google alternative. We'll wait to see exactly how whether Apple can really take this forward. But the notion of having all your AI in your pocket, on your phone, is now being realized. Okay. And of course, an example would be the ChatGPT. I mean, that's changed over the last month, and it's just about to change again because OpenAI have promised to simplify it and have maybe 2 models that you can choose from, which would be nice. Okay. And there's an example of the sort of questions, when we do this sort of thing in workshops, the sort of questions that we ask and the sort of comments that you can ask. So again, please use that as you will. Okay. Sue?
So back to responsible AI. So this is what we really want to focus on, getting people to think about the questions that we need to ask in relation to being using generative AI in an ethical and responsible way. So defining responsibility, some quotes here. It's about being responsible for our own actions, not kind of blaming other people. We need to make the decision whether it's okay to use and not to use in different contexts, and to help our students to also discuss this and make those decisions along the way. So we do have to take consequences for our own actions and meet ethical standards, of course.
We'll not talk about this slide in any detail, but there's some, because we give you the answers in a slide at the end. But the notion of just what information do we have about how much energy this consumes, how much time should we be able to spend on generative AI without feeling guilty about killing the planet? We don't have answers to these questions. Okay, Sue.
So one of the people that we've been following recently is Sasha Lucioni, and she's done some fantastic work. She works for Hugging Face, but she's looking at the sustainability, the cost, the power for using these talks. And this is a TED talk which I highly recommend that you visit after the event, because she's looking at the sustainability, the copyright, the bias and discrimination, and really raises some important questions that we all need to focus on when we're using these different tools. So one of the papers that came out of their research has demonstrated that the enormous power for image generation, which is 10 times more than text generation. Well, what is that actually costing?
The other book that we're really fond of, which has come out in the in the last 6 months is a book called AI Snake Oil. And you'll find lots of stuff online. Next slide, please, Sue, because you can just look at the diagram from the book. Basically, what they're saying is that some AI applications simply do not work. Some do work, some don't, and some that don't work are positively harmful. So you have a look at this diagram, and in particular, have a look at their article on AI as normal technology, because they're making the argument that AI is moving into this thing that we take for granted every day, and that has really important implications for how we use it and how we become responsible. Okay.
And also a really good focus to have conversations with the students about,
Absolutely.
These are really good things to talk and have those discussions with them. So
and there are a few questions for us.
Yeah, more things to consider, but conscious of time, we'll skip on. So
this is our map of the things that we really need to push to students in order to get them to behave, and to staff actually, in order to get them to get all of us behaving more responsibly. One is the understanding Gen AI as a new form of software. Okay, because it is new. It is not software that we really played with before, because it excels at pattern creation. It doesn't just give you the answers. It is looking at this great wodge of data and bringing out patterns to provide an answer. So just something very simple as offering students a diagram of the structure of the large language model, a huge data set of images or words or whatever it might be, organized in a particular way, linked up to a chatbot, and trained, not programmed. Okay, so you can start talking about the key points without necessarily turning all our students into data scientists or computer scientists, but they need to think about these sort of general issues. Okay. And this notion of how we relate to AI, there's a conversation that was kicking about on the radio a few weeks ago. How is being polite to AI worth the millions of dollars it costs? Putting aside the question of cost for the moment, do you say please and thank you to your AI? And if so, why? There's evidence both yay and nay for that. But the fact that we're having that conversation suggests that Gen AI is a very different sort of software. Okay. And of course, there's all the examples from text to image, which we started with. And there's another example from 2023, which illustrates just how far we have traveled. Okay. And AI generated images are now extremely good. And you can try that to test the AI deepfake game, thanks to Leon Furzy. And I fail it, I'm afraid. Okay, so we'll move on. Okay. And of course, you may well have confronted AI generated voice scams. And we would say that most of us will be fooled. Okay. And the one question that we can keep coming back to is how far we do understand this technology. And so a couple of quotes there, which are either really interesting or rather alarming. Is it too complex for any human to understand? Okay. And there's a quote from ex-OpenAI employer, somebody on the board of OpenAI some time ago, who effectively is again saying, I don't understand AI, and no one does. Okay. Okay, so move on. There's some more questions. Yeah. So the understanding what we can do. This was a question we asked Gemini. Can you produce a diagram of how UK lecturers anticipated the application of generative AI across higher education? Gemini refused to answer on the grounds that it doesn't have the data. ChatGPT answered and gave us this diagram, which we think is absolute nonsense. So, okay. So, and there's our summary of the sorts of things that we can expect to see from Gen AI this coming year, which you can have a play with, as I know we're nearly running out of time. So we would suggest that the top right-hand side of that diagram might be particularly important. This idea of agents, this idea of a focus on, and you'll see it in some of our examples from earlier on, actually, focus on dialogue, not just this notion of question and answer, because that's is probably the most limited use of Gen AI that you can do with it. But what we need is this sort of dialogue, going backwards and forwards, getting it to play roles, etc., etc. Okay, so. And of course, people are now talking about the AI wars, and they're also talking about big visions that we might have in future. And Sam Altman would like to build a brain for the world. So again, lots of stuff that we can find very easily online, which we can explore with colleagues and with students. So again, just some questions that we can ask.
Just a few things, you might have come across these before, but useful to think about when using generative AI. I really like this by ACAR, to think about the problem, selecting the right tools, but the reflection bit at the end, you know, which came out in Hazel's chapter and others, that, you know, reflecting on the experience is really important. And also helping students to improve the prompt, you know, what you put in, you know, the better it is, the better you get out, but providing detail to get the context and information. Students may not know this, so it's important to get them to think about what they should do, and staff for that matter. And this is an infographic that we created, and we're just in the process of creating some cards to further this as an activity. It's not so clear on the screen just there, but it's a mnemonic really. It's just some prompts for students and staff to use in an activity to think about using generative AI in a safe way. So a resource again that you can take away and use with your students.
I think we're running out of time, I think, Sue.
How long have we got left? Because we started a bit late, didn't we? So we'll just move into some of the issues. So that, you know, the media and the panic ensues in different ways in the press.
And there's one example of, you'll find, as many of you will already have done so, multiple futures envisaged online. And this is one particular one, because an interesting one, because as well as the general future, it also talks about what individuals might do, which is the next slide. Collaboration wins out over competition is an interesting thought. Okay, so we think this slide is illegitimate. Perhaps we could leave that until for a wee bit discussion if we have time for questions. I've just had to see a message in the chat. We're okay for a few minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're on to the responsible. So Peter and I have just written a chapter for another book for the International Federation of National Teaching Fellows, looking at responsible use, and we've split this down into four key areas. We think there's cost to the individual, there's cost to the environment, and there's cost to knowledge and future jobs. So there's cost to the individual, there's the divide that we mentioned about having access to paid for tools, the idea that it's a personal friend or a personal assistant, you know, but people taking that to the nth degree, so they're not actually going out, and that's a worry for safety and mental health. Cost the environment, everything through to energy consumption, but also e-waste from the materials that are created for making these servers, etc. And of course, the cost to knowledge, we know that it's not accurate, there's misinformation, hallucination, bias, and all those things. We need to be considering that in the outputs that come out. We can't trust all of the information. And there's a cost to future jobs, and as alluded to, promise of new jobs, and yes, there will be new jobs, but it's also going to be taking other people's jobs, and in particular concern is the creative professions, which has been in the media certainly very recently in the last few weeks, because it is a big concern. So that chapter and the book will be out I believe next month. And back to Sasha Lucione, you know, the fact is, how much energy does it actually cost? You know, there are people making it up, particularly the tech companies. They don't really know, is a message there. And then the future jobs is more about productivity, and this links to a nice little piece, a scenario where somebody's using Copilot, they're going away on holiday and expecting to come back to loads of emails, but Copilot says, I can take over your computer, I can answer your emails. And he thought, yeah, that's great, came back and it was really organized, and he allowed it to attend meetings for him going forwards. And then before he knew it, they were becoming an AI led company, and he got an email from a chatbot to say, sorry, your job's no longer available. So whilst hypothetical, it's it does make you think about, you know, if these things are taking over, will there be jobs there for certain people? So something to think about. And Peter?
That's the yes, that's the suggestion that Sam Altman, the head of CEO of OpenAI, who do ChatGPT, that we're actually should be heading for universal basic income. The machines do all the work, and we just reap the rewards. And again,
Will we get equal pay?
well, that's another interesting question, Sue. Another interesting question. We've got another link to some stuff on environmental impact. And maybe next slide. Yeah. So basically, we're trying to suggest that one thing that's now that we've got much more information about AI, how Gen AI can be implemented both in education and in society more generally, we really need to develop. We need to start interrogating all the information that we haven't got at the moment to understand the context of Gen AI, understand the technology, possess the skills, and understand the issues. And perhaps the final bullet point of that slide, wouldn't it be good if we can influence the next generation of people off to work in organizations to use Gen AI effectively, ethically, and we think the next year or two we should be really focusing on a broader definition of responsibly.
And we finish with lots of unanswered questions because
yes,
we don't have the answers, but again, discussions to continue.
But who knows, we may have them in the next year or two, who knows? And we go back to this idea of a collective a strategy which runs across the organization, which involves staff and students, and now thinks about effective, ethical, and responsible.
Okay, shall we leave
I think
it there?
that's it. Yes.
Stop sharing. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sue and Peter. That was wonderful. Excellent. You really brought us on a journey. There's so much to consider, isn't there? I'm just going to see, is there any questions? Questions coming through in the chat, but also we might take a question from the floor. So I see the first, I'll just go to the back first. Question from Ken in SCTU. Thanks, Orla.
Perfect. I'm not sure, can you hear me?
Is that on?
Yes.
Oh, you can hear me, okay, all right. So, Sue and Peter, your slide on costs there left out one important cost, and that's the cost of doing in a place afford. As someone that has an interest in the climate and like to sustainably and responsibly, I do think the climate scare around ChatGPT is over amplified a little bit. And even the talk about it takes 10 times as much power as a typical Google search. Typical Google search uses an infinitesimally tiny amount of power. 10 times the tiny amount is still a
no. It was a text search in generative AI that 10 times more.
Well, no, but it's 10 times a tiny amount. So 10 times a tiny amount, like it still effectively rounds to zero. In terms of the water consumption, even for image generation, you take your shower 1 second shorter this morning. That's about the amount of water that's used in one generation. So the argument around we all need to be more think about the power and think about the water. We don't think about it in our everyday lives and how we live anyway. The answer to power generation is simple because we use power sustainably. And yes, the water one is a challenge, but water can be reused. So not that it's gone forever. I think it's another one of these things that's just water to muddy the conversation around ChatGPT. I'm not saying that we all need to be complete climate criminals, but it's like, you know, as an EV driver, you see people telling you that, yeah, but the stuff is dug out of the ground in Africa, and it's the kids who are going down the cobalt mines, and so you know you'll get conflicting opinions all of the time around sustainability and environmental impact.
I think we'd respond, I think, by saying one is that the Gen AI industry is not revealing about its costs, and we think that's possibly the most worrying thing. And they're building nuclear plants. They're opening 3 Mile Island again to support this. Now, what could possibly go wrong at 3 Mile Island? And in fact, I see a comment in the in the chat there that, okay, in fact, I was in a discussion a couple of days ago, chat from Google there, who was saying that they're now much more efficient, much more effective, use much less cost. But at the same time, applications like Google Gemini and what have you are increasing their usage by an astronomical amount. So, you may well be cutting down and making things more efficient, but if, as a result, 20 million more people use it, I think that's one of the reasons why I'm still have to say I'm concerned.
So I just posted an article about gas turbines, which it's a concern. But yeah, they're all things that we need to be conscious of. But thank you, Ken. That's a really good discussion.
Thank you. Any other questions on the floor? Oh, there's one.
Many thanks, colleagues. When you listed the diagram with the costs, you talked about cost to knowledge, but one of the things that doesn't come up as much in some of the conversations, and I'm just interested in your thoughts on it, is the idea of the cost of the essentially licensed material, the knowledge that they've drawn from to create basically the input data.
Absolutely, it is in the chapter. I kind of skipped over because we were rushing a bit, but yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So my question is, do you think there is scope for whether it's a commercial entity or a kind of a nation state or EU org or whatever, to create something where they have actually only used data that's appropriate to use, or are we kind of beyond that? Like, is it part of me feels like the most successful future iterations might be the ones who can say every bit of data that has been used to train this GPT or LLM, whatever you want to call it, is licensed, and therefore there's not that ethical issue around using it, that actually every single version of ChatGPT has a major issue with it. And then as academics yourselves, we technically know that a lot of these tools haven't actually done the work of scraping every open access paper that's available. In theory they could, but actually it's when people upload open access academic articles to them that's what they train on, rather than going and looking for them at times. So as academics and producers of knowledge, I'm just interested in your own thoughts on that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think I've got two answers to that. One is that in some respects, for a lot of stuff that's now already been scraped off whatever copyright license, we are too far down the road. But I think there's very much a counter pressure which is saying to organizations that they must license their data now. So I think if people had cottoned onto this a few years ago, we might be in a different situation. But I think there's going to be much more effective licensing going on from now on. But it doesn't get rid of the sins of the past, if you like.
Okay. Right. Oh, what? Sorry. Goodbye. Oh, the front door. Thanks.
One more question here. Thank you so much for wonderful talk. I have a very simple question. I'm lecturer at ATU Galway. I know that the use of a responsible AI in education is very much appreciated. However, equally we see that current teaching and learning pedagogies and evaluation criteria somehow does not fit this advancement or generative AI, particularly when students are using generative AI, ChatGPT for their assignment submissions. So what suggestions you will give me, being academic or teacher, to evaluate the assessments of my students and ensure that they are improving their critical thinking and it is not adversely affecting due to generative AI use in their assignments? Thank you.
One of the approaches that some academics are taking is to actually bring generative AI openly into the assessment. So you ask them to use that and compare that with different sources. So you might use a couple of different large language models, and they could compare and contrast and critique the results of that in comparison to the theory, to the lecture materials that you're providing, and they catalogue that as a journey, the process of doing that as part of the assessment. So that's one approach.
Yeah. And I think the other general approach is that we must need to make sure that the discussions of AI which we have with students include all of these issues. And I think I just seen a quote in the chat, a wider discussion about increased energy usage from our everyday use of tech is required beyond AI, and I completely agree with that. That we really have lived in a false economy, in a false sunrise, where all this stuff appears to be free. And in fact, we've recently been reading several books on generative AI for students, and one of the complaints I have about all of them is that they spend far too little time suggesting that these technologies have limitations and costs and applications way beyond just getting them to work. So we really need to surface this discussion, this debate, really, because the best form of responsible behaviour is the one that you do for yourself.
Yes, thank you, and thanks, Peter, and thanks, Sue. Just conscious of the time now, and just to wrap up, like your talk was really powerful, and I think we can take from it, with the whole work that you've done in co-creating this book with a community of practitioners, is the value of working together in higher education. Yes. And we do need to find more ways to work together. Sometimes we rely on funding sources, and I know you mentioned tutors, Sue, but how do we move forward? And the sector does need a coherent strategy, and we do need enablers for us to work together across our various different countries, across Europe, across the UK, and wider afield. So, like we came together during COVID, I hope this is perhaps there's a new wave, and this book shows an example of what you can achieve together. So hopefully we can find more ways. And if you hear of any opportunities to come together, we'd be very welcome and very willing to get involved. So
we'll come to Galway one day, promise. We'll come to Galway.
That'll be great. Okay, so thanks very much. We'll close on that. And thank you, Sue, and thank you, Peter, and Jenny, and Powell as well. Stephen Powell.
Thank you.
So we've 2 minutes before, we'll just take 2 or 3 minutes before we do the changeover. We just have another session that's happening now. We have 4 talks, they're 10 minutes each, and my colleague Noreen Henry in Teaching and Learning is going to chair this session. So we'll just allow a minute or two for the changeover. So thank you all.